This is a short story about a drive I did in 1977 from Kuwait to Reading in the UK, and it's entitled 4,000 Miles in 7 Days Solo, or An Idiot in a Fantastic Car. Introduction and why it came about. It was November 1977. I'd been in Kuwait for the last 10 months, making a living any way I could, doing odd jobs and living in the servants' quarters of a block of flats. Bit of a change from the 5-star hotels around the world to which I had become accustomed in my last job. One of the exploits I got up to was building a 2-seater hovercraft, which featured as a central page spread in the Arab Times on the 14th of September 1977. On a trip back to the UK to do some headhunting from my Kuwaiti sponsor, I bought the bits I would need for the venture. When I arrived late at night back in Kuwait International Airport, loaded with rather a lot of excess baggage, which included 2 small petrol engines, a cowling for the fan, and all the blades and other bits, I was checked, as was everyone, by the customs officer. Kuwait, being a more liberal Arab country, had a female officer. She very politely asked me what it was all for. I explained I was going to build a hovercraft. She quite obviously didn't know what a hovercraft was, so I tried to explain. I was told to wait. She returned with a senior officer, evident by all the gold braid on the peak of his cap and shoulder epaulets. I told him it was for a hovercraft. He looked at me very seriously and nodded, the expression on his face telling me he had about as much idea of what I was talking about as the female officer. "Good," he said. "That's okay." The female officer then removed one of the 3 bottles of whiskey I had in my suitcase, closed it and said I could go. A German who had been standing next to me at the inspection desk caught up with me and said, "They left you with 2 bottles. They took all of mine." "I have a British passport," I told him. That was typical of life in the Middle East in those days. The previous year I had found myself on the verge of a nervous breakdown, chucked in a very well-paid job, and went home for a while, back to the UK and the house that I owned in Caversham near Reading. What brought the breakdown on? Well, for the previous 3 years I had averaged 87 long-distance aeroplane flights a year, and for the previous 18 months I had not had one whole day off, not weekends, Christmas Day, New Year's Day or any other day. Weekends in the Middle East are Thursday and Friday. Some of the consulting engineers and the work I was dealing with were based in London, Paris, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Germany, and others in Italy and Turkey, plus a few in the Far East. So on a Wednesday I would fly back to Europe or off to the Far East, then back to the Middle East for Saturday and the start of the next Arab week. Waiting around in airports, booking flights, aircraft meals, trying to get some sleep on the plane, all became normal for me, along with a jet lag, not commonly understood in the 1970s. And on top of that, the frustration of dealing with all the different cultures. In Arabic culture, you never tell the person you're meeting with that you need to be someplace else unless your business with them is finished, no matter how long that might take. There was one occasion when the chap I was due to meet in England turned up 6 days late with little or no explanation other than he had been busy in Jordan. I was introduced to this way of life on my first assignment in Kuwait. I had arrived with the British lads to set up a site where we would be working. Our machinery was coming by ship, a Greek vessel called the Aristylos. She was due on a certain day but didn't arrive. I went to the shipping agent's office and asked where she was. "Not coming today, maybe tomorrow," I was informed. That same answer was repeated for the following 6 days. On the 7th day, the ship again wasn't in port, But this time when I went to the shipping office, the bloke said, "She came last night. Gone again now." "So where are our machines?" I wanted to know. "On ship still." "So where's the ship?" "Abadan." "You mean she didn't unload?" "Nope, coming back in 2 days." "Well, why didn't she unload?" "No berth. Must book berth. Can only book berth if she is seen by harbour authorities." There was a lot being imported into Kuwait at the time, and always numerous ships anchored offshore waiting for a berth. The captain of the Australis had simply booked his place in the queue and used the waiting time to drop stuff off at Abadan. It can be very difficult for a stranger to this culture to get used to it, but you must if you want to remain sane, or more or less sane. In some ways, I think looking back, it was a better culture than our Western style. A lot of stress is actually taken away. You are not forever watching the clock. Life happens at its own pace, and you accept it as it happens. However, when part of your life is with that culture, and the other part is Western style, and both are mixed into the same week, it becomes a strain, and it certainly strained me to the limit. Add to that the unrelenting heat, especially in the summer, and you might begin to understand why I became to the edge of a nervous breakdown. As an example of the heat, I learned something just after our machinery had finally arrived on that first experience in the Middle East. When we were getting the equipment together in England for the contract we were to undertake in Kuwait, I included several sets of spanners. Because we were going to be working outdoors, I knew it would be sandy, and I imagined we would lose a few spanners, so I bought the cheaper variety, plain black. After the first 2 days of using them, I went into Kuwait City and bought some chrome-plated sets. The black ones got so hot you couldn't pick them up, and the only way to use them was to keep them in a bucket of water. Another example was when I asked head office to send me some high-range thermometers. They arrived in the post, and I duly collected them from the customs offices. I opened the packet to make sure they'd sent me the right ones, and then drove into the city centre, where I had to go to the bank. I left the thermometer I had removed from the packet on the dashboard. When I finished my bank visit and arrived back at the car, I found that the top had blown off the thermometer. The top reading was 120 degrees centigrade. The windscreen had acted like a greenhouse. Chapter 2. The Trigger Point. I was in Medan, a large town on Sumatra, one of the Indonesian islands, when my problem came to the surface. Having done all I could to investigate the potential site we might be working on, the availability of plant, equipment, local labour and accommodation, etc., etc., I got back to my hotel about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and lay down on the bed. It was hot and humid. On the flight from Jakarta a couple of days earlier, the plane had lost cabin pressure at high altitude. That's when all the oxygen masks fall from overhead, and you've been told and shown by the flight attendants to take the mask and place it over your mouth and breathe normally. Rubbish. That's not what happens. The truth is you instinctively clap your hands over your ears and scream because the sudden pain is so severe. At least that's what happened on that flight. I don't know if I screamed, but a lot of the other passengers did. That, the frustration of my job, and the jet lag constantly with me, all led up to what was happening next. I lay on the bed and it didn't take long for me to fall into a deep sleep. When I awoke, I looked at my watch and saw it was 8 o'clock and realised I had missed my flight. Or so I thought. The only thing I could remember was that I had a flight to catch at 8. I resigned myself to the fact that I had missed it and then started to wonder where I was. The trouble was, I couldn't remember where I was, where I was going, or where I had come from. Nothing. I filled the bath and lay down in the hot water thinking it might help me wake up. Lying there, I suddenly recalled that it was dark outside, so it must be night. My flight was at 8 o'clock in the morning. I got out of the bath and rang reception and asked where I was. In room, whatever it was, sir, the receptionist told me. Yes, but could you tell me where, please? In the Southern Dutch Hotel, sir. I know this sounds funny, but please tell me the name of the town. Medan, sir. Thank you, I said. I had no idea where Medan was. He might just as well have said Timbuktu. Then it occurred to me to look at my passport and the airline ticket. That's how messed up I was. I'd flown from Jakarta and was going to a meeting in Singapore. From there I was going to another meeting in Tehran before returning to my base office in Kuwait. Fine, I had that sorted. I got back in the bath, more relaxed, but more than a little worried. The meetings in Singapore and Tehran completed, I arrived back 2 days later at my office in Kuwait. I locked the door, sat down at my desk and burst into tears. Not good, I thought. I rang the doctor and asked if I could see him straight away. He agreed. What do you need? I cannot prescribe in Kuwait unless you are in hospital, he said. Do you mean something like Valium, I asked. Yes. I suggest you go home and see your doctor there. I drove back to the office, my mind in a whirl. It was past working hours, everybody had gone back to their apartments and the office was empty. I wrote notes for everyone who needed to be told, booked a flight for the following morning and headed back to the UK and head office. I cannot recall anything of that flight. All I know is that the next day I was in Manchester. Whilst in head office, I shared a room with the managing director. I sat down on the visitor's chair at his desk and told him what had happened. I said I was going to take 2 weeks holiday, and when I came back I would want half-time working for 6 months while I got my personal life in order. I'd been divorced by my Swedish wife, had a house to sell and loads of other personal stuff to be sorted. Oh, you can't do that, I was told. In that case, John, accept my notice as of today. I'll see you in 2 weeks. I booked a flight to Stockholm to find my ex-wife in the hope that I could put things right with her, because in spite of all that had happened, I still loved her. But that was not to be. I returned to our empty house in Caversham near Reading. At the end of 2 weeks, I returned to my head office in Manchester and my desk at 8 o'clock in the morning to find, as was usual, that the managing director was already at his desk. Welcome back, Michael. Come and sit down, he said, and he told me he would fill me in with what had been happening. He spoke for a long while, and when he had finished, I said, "It sounds as if you want me to work the first 2 weeks of this month then." "What do you mean?" he asked. "I told you I want half-time working for 6 months." "Oh no, we can't do that." "In that case, I'm finished." I got up, cleared my personal stuff from the desk and left. I didn't feel good about it. I didn't feel bad. In fact, I didn't feel anything other than a bit lost. That day I drove back to Caversham, and for 3 months I stayed in the house. I didn't set an alarm, just slept till I woke, went to bed when I felt tired, and slowly sorted myself out. The house felt empty.